Why do you come to church? Do you come because you've always come? Because your friends are here? Because you enjoy the singing? Because it makes you feel better? Now, all those may be true, but we come for one fundamental reason. We come to meet God. I was very struck years ago when I was on holiday in Normandy, and I came towards a church on a Sunday morning, and it had over the church outside the words, prepare, in French, of course, not English, prepare yourself to meet God. And I thought, when I saw the words which we now have in that most elegant notice outside our own church, Chapel Street Methodist Church, a good place to meet God. But what does it mean to meet God? It doesn't mean the same as it does to meet each other. You and I, when we meet each other, we see the other person, we hear them, we may touch them, we may smell them. Except in an unusual sense, that is not true of God. We may see him with our inward eye. We may hear him with our inward ear. But when we meet God, there are those things that happen in the meeting, as there are those things which happen when we meet other people. And they are what we see in the story of Isaiah in the temple. And first, he exposes us, he shows us ourselves as we really are. The word that comes in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5, woe. Woe is me, I am lost. I am a man of unclean lips. I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Isaiah tells us that it was in the year that King Uzziah died, and they didn't have dates as we do, before Christ and after Christ, but therefore they dated things by the year of a king's birth or death. So in the year that King Uzziah died, 742 years before the birth of Christ, Isaiah is in the temple. Uzziah was a great king, perhaps the greatest after Solomon. He had reigned for 50 years. His fame spread far abroad. And then at the very end of his life, he was inflicted with leprosy, which he saw and they saw as the punishment for having done what no layperson could do, burning incense in the temple. And in the year of his death, Isaiah enters the temple, thinking perhaps of the king, and then seeing not the king on his throne, but the Lord on his throne, high and lifted up. And the vision of God in his glory caused him to say, woe is me, I am lost. In comparison with God, he sensed his utter unworthiness. It wasn't that Isaiah and the people, because he then says, and a people of unclean lips, not only himself. Compared with those who were singing the praise of God, he and the people seemed those whose lips were unclean, defiled. They were religious people. Isaiah tells us they were temple treaders. They were in the temple frequently. They observed the Sabbath religiously. And then when the Sabbath was over, they could get back to business and cheat and steal and bribe and live as they chose to live, dishonoring God. And so in the presence of God, he is not comparing himself with somebody else. The comparison is with God, who for us makes himself known in Jesus Christ. You see, we can so easily compare ourselves with others, maybe somebody else in church, and you can say, well, I'm as good as she is. Or one of your neighbours, I'm better than he is. And we can come out favourably. In any case, we choose the things on which we compare ourselves with them. But here we meet God who makes himself known in Jesus Christ. And we see one who was humble, forgiving, compassionate, generous. And we begin to see ourselves differently, because the comparison is no longer with some other person who is not unlike us, or we not unlike them. That is what people found in the life of Jesus. That is that moment when Peter says, "Depart from me, Lord, sinner that I am." And so when we come into our worship, as in the story that we read of the prodigal son, he had lived in his father's house, he enjoyed the plenty of his father's house, but he was one of those who, as it were, had left church and gone off and chosen to live in his own way, enjoying the delights of life as he saw it at that stage. And then gradually he came to his senses and said, "Even the hired servants of my father are in a better condition than I." And when he returned, it wasn't to claim to be a son. He said, "I am not worthy to be called your son. Make me as a hired servant." That was all he was fit for in the presence of God. And so you and I, coming to worship, if we meet God, we shall begin to see ourselves as we are. And as we see ourselves are exposed, then we know that we are meeting him and not simply meeting our friends or enjoying the singing or the feelings. So that's the first thing, and this can happen to us in the prayers or the hymns or the readings or the sermon. How it comes to us will vary according to the occasion, but that is what we may expect to happen if when we come we are open, if we prepare ourselves to meet God, or if we look always at the notice before we come in and remember that though we will meet those whom we know and like and love, or we hope, we come first of all as a congregation and as individuals to meet God. And then second, as we move to verse 7, "Lo, woe is me, I am lost. Lo, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, your sin forgiven." Isaiah was conscious of the great gulf between himself and God, and the estrangement that comes when we do not live our lives in the service and of God and in love and obedience to him. There is a sense of estrangement, of distance between us and God. That distance was real to Isaiah, but it was bridged, not by Isaiah reaching up, but then one of the seraphs flew with a live coal from off the altar, and he touched my lips and said, "Lo, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, your sin forgiven." And when we look at the life of Jesus, that is exactly how he was experienced by people, in the way he befriended those who were outcasts, rejected in the society, sinners as they were called, publicans and sinners, the tax collectors and sinners. And that comes out, for example, in the story that he told. He was going in and eating with those who were sinners, and that shocked the religious people of the day, as it shocks us today. And so Jesus tells them the story that we know so well, though we don't always take its message to our own hearts. He told them the story of the two sons. But the point of the story comes at the end, with the elder brother. The elder brother, like the Pharisees, saw himself as wronged because God was showing, or the father in this case, love and forgiveness to a son who had lost his way and who came back unworthy of the father. It comes out more vividly perhaps in the parable that Luke tells on another occasion about the publican and the Pharisee going to pray. The publican, this tax collector who was exploiting his people and not living properly in the service of God, he goes into the temple and he dares not look up, but says, "God, have mercy on me, sinner that I am." And the Pharisee, the religious person, you and me, he goes in and he sees other people and knows how much better he is than they. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all I possess. And so he could look God straight in the eye. And Jesus says, it is the first who went home accepted by God. Because he was open to God, he could receive the love and forgiveness of God. But when we are in that other mood, comparing ourselves with others and seeing ourselves as worthy of God, then we close ourselves to his love. We in effect reject the forgiveness because we don't think we need it. We're all right. We are religious. We're good. We go to church. We say our prayers. We give a certain amount of money to other people. And without disturbing ourselves too much, we live on the whole a pretty good life. And so you and I, when we come to church Sunday by Sunday, are we so open to God that we can begin to say with the prodigal son, "I'm not worthy to be called your son, your daughter." You recall the way in which you and I have failed to do some of those things we should have done those things we should not have done, our thoughts and our words, unworthy of the Lord whom we serve. And so we become open to hear the words, perhaps at communion as we're given the bread and the wine, "Lo, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, your sin forgiven." Or through the reading or the preaching or the words of forgiveness after our prayer of confession at the beginning, through some part of the service, the gulf that separates us from God is bridged by him with forgiveness, with acceptance, with renewal of our discipleship. And then the third mark comes out in verse 9, again with that brief, simple word, "Go. Woe is me, I am lost." We are exposed. "Lo, this has touched your lips, we are forgiven." Go, we are placed under the command of God, we are commissioned by him. And Isaiah is given a commission that was impossibly difficult. He was to go to a people and he was going to bring his message, the message of God to them, and the people would not hear him, or would at least not understand him, because if they did understand him, they would have to change. And when we don't understand, when we don't want to change, then somehow what is said passes us by. And that is the task he has given. Because always when we meet with God, we are placed, so to speak, under his command. We are given a commission. It's a general command. We're placed at his disposal, but it's also very particular. And so, for example, we may, as we come to worship, simply do as I remember a friend saying that he did at the beginning of each day. His first morning prayer was simply to say, "Lord, I am here." In other words, I am yours as this new day begins. And so there is a sense in which as we come, through the hymns especially, we place ourselves once more in the service of God and in the following of Christ. But also the command or the commission may be very particular, as it was for Isaiah, as it was for the elder brother, rather for him particular in the sense that he was to share in the welcome. He was to rejoice in the return of his brother, whom he was treating no longer as his brother. He refers to him as this your son, not this my brother. And the father in his reply says, your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. And so we are placed under the command once more. We put ourselves at God's disposal, but that is sometimes much too easy. The command is also particular. It may be a letter you should write, a person you should apologize to, somebody that you should visit, a friendship that should be renewed. It can be any range of things that is brought home to you as you hear the word read and preached, as you meet God in prayer and in the singing of hymns, or in the silence as you prepare or as you leave. So these are the three reasons. There may be others, but out of this passage that we see, we are exposed, we are forgiven, and then we're placed once more under the command of God to serve him. We've heard recently about the bombing in Omar so many years ago, the worst of the things that happened in Northern Ireland, because a particular child was abandoned, not enough evidence being available. And 29 people were killed. One of them was a girl of 15, Lorraine Wilson. During her Jubilee year, the Queen went to Omar, but for security reasons it wasn't announced until very shortly, a matter of an hour or two before she actually came. And some people in Omar, not many, but some people heard of it and went out in order to be there for her visit. And there were two people, the parents indeed, of Lorraine Wilson. And as the Queen came round, they were brought to meet the Queen. And he was just wearing an anorak and no tie. He'd come out in a hurry. And he said to the Queen, I came to see you. I didn't expect to meet you. We may come to see. What we need to do is to come to meet. Let us pray. Loving God our Father, give us the challenge and the joy of meeting with you. The challenge as we see ourselves afresh, the joy as we know your love and forgiveness, the challenge as we are sent out anew in your service, not in our own strength, in our own resources, but in the power of your Spirit, with the support of those who are part of your church, your family. Grant, we pray, in this coming week, that having met with you now, we may meet you in others as we see them, those who encourage us, those who need us, and even those who may betray us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.